The NHL season is finally over. The Vegas Golden Knights are the 2023 Stanley Cup champions. And on today's episode, we'll be talking about what lessons the Dallas Stars can learn from the VGK and the Florida Panthers after the conclusion of their series. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Stars.
You're Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, coming to you on this Thursday, June 15th. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for stopping by and making Locked On Stars your first listen every single day. Be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. We are always free and available, no matter where or how you may choose to listen. And we got plenty to discuss on today's episode, even with the conclusion of the NHL season. What a crazy, chaotic season it was. The Vegas Golden Knights, the winners of the Stanley Cup for the first time in their franchise's history, and only their second appearance in the Stanley Cup Final. And, I mean, just based on pure reaction of everything, I think it's pretty easy to say, it's safe to say, it's abundantly clear that the Dallas Stars are the true runners-up in this Stanley Cup playoffs, in this NHL postseason. With all due respect to Paul Maurice and the Florida Panthers, the Dallas Stars are truly the team that was the closest or the second best in terms of this tournament. The Panthers had a phenomenal run, a great run, a historic run. They take down the Boston Bruins after falling in that series, a 3-1 deficit. They take down the Maple Leafs. They sweep the Carolina Hurricanes, one of the best teams in the league during the regular season, but they just plain and simple ran out of gas in the Stanley Cup Finals, and they just didn't have the juice to hang with the Vegas Golden Knights for the entirety of the series. Maybe there's something to be said about the amount of time that they had to rest after the sweep of the Carolina Hurricanes, as opposed to Vegas having to battle a little bit at the end of their series to put the Dallas Stars away. But, I mean, plain and simple, the Panthers were overmatched and just did not have the capability to hang with the VGK in this series. And, I mean, they were able to squeak out that one overtime win, but really, I mean, it was all Vegas all the time. And if you look at the entirety of the postseason, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that the Stars gave the Golden Knights the most trouble this postseason. They made them work the hardest for a win in a series. I know that the Edmonton Oilers also took the Vegas Golden Knights to 6 games, but it was just different. I feel like even after that first win, it was 6-4 in that win against the Oilers in game 1 of that second round series. You had the idea that, the Oilers would probably win a game or two because they have 2 of the best players on the planet, but Vegas was just far too overwhelming defensively, far too powerful offensively, and the goaltending was still very solid. Even though they had Laurent Brossoit still at the start of that series, Adin Hill came in and did just as well, if not better, than what Laurent Brossoit had been doing up to that point during the playoff run. And the Stars, I think, gave the Golden Knights a little bit more of a scare after winning those 2 consecutive games. And then, of course, getting game 6 at home. Clearly, the Vegas Golden Knights not as phased as maybe they could have been. But I think it's fair to say that the Stars might have been the team that gave the Golden Knights the biggest scare in the playoffs, because it certainly wasn't Winnipeg and it certainly wasn't the Florida Panthers. And I really do think that the Stars, if they get some things to go differently, a few other, circumstances to fall their way in the Western Conference Final, and they make it to the Stanley Cup Final, I don't think it's too far of a stretch to imagine that they beat the Florida Panthers in 5 or 6 games. and eventually find themselves as champions, especially given the roster that they had, a deep roster. As deep as the Vegas Golden Knights, especially in the forwards department. Defense may be lacking a little bit, but I think that they would have had enough to slow down that Panthers offensive attack. Of course, the Stars had beaten the Panthers twice in the regular season, although that doesn't necessarily mean as much because they swept the Vegas Golden Knights in the regular season as well. But hopefully, this is something that adds motivation to the Dallas Stars roster, to that locker room going into this next season, knowing how close they were and knowing that if a few things go differently in that series, in the first two games, especially against the VGK, I think that the end of this season ends on a little bit of a happier note and likely ends with a parade inside the city of Dallas. And so hopefully the guys, if any of them watched this series or kept up with it, take that into account and know how close they were. It's incredibly hard to get back to where they were this past season. But you make it, difficult to get to the finals every single year, regardless of who makes it. It's always a grind. And it, made it difficult, at least from a fan perspective. And I know from my perspective, to watch this series at times thinking what could have been for the Dallas Stars and how close some of these guys have gotten to winning the Stanley Cup and how some of them are nearing the end of their careers. And you'd like to see them win at least one before they hang up the skates and move on with their lives and their lives in the sport of hockey. It was a little different than last year watching, the Colorado Avalanche hoist the Stanley Cup. Of course, you would have liked to have seen the Stars do it, but, with that first round exit, it was a little bit different. Whereas you see how far they made it into the Western Conference Final, and you really do consider, if one or two things go a little bit differently, if a few plays don't happen or, happen the opposite of the way they unfolded, the Stars could have very easily found themselves in the same position as the Vegas Golden Knights. Of course, that team does deserve a ton of credit as well for how disciplined they played down the stretch of the regular season and of the playoffs as well. I'm not trying to negate anything that the VGK have done. I think that the guys on that roster and that coaching staff earned the right to be in the Stanley Cup Final. But it's just crazy how tight the sport of hockey is, and just a few other bounces or a few different plays unfolding differently, and the outlook of the season can be incredibly different. But I really do think that is the conclusion that not just myself, and I believe a lot of others have arrived at as well, that you look at the Dallas Stars really as the runner-up, and really the final was decided in the Western Conference Finals. As good as a season as the Panthers had, they couldn't hang with Vegas, and I don't know if they really could have hung with the Dallas Stars in a best-of-7 series either. Well, we're going to continue to break down a few lessons that the Stars can learn from the participants of the Stanley Cup Finals. We'll talk about the Vegas Golden Knights and their defensive structure coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all the fun that you'll have. You can get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Stars your first listen every single day, for continuing to make our podcast a part of your daily routine. Truly does mean a lot that each and every one of you continue to tune in and make us a part of your lives as we continue on the first, I guess, official day of the offseason when I'm recording this for every NHL team. The season officially over. The Vegas Golden Knights crowned as champions of the league. And there's lessons that I think the Dallas Stars can learn from the Vegas Golden Knights, having played them, having fallen to them in the Western Conference Finals. And I think one of the biggest things that they can take away from this team and hopefully try to replicate to some extent is the defense. Adin Hill was the hero for this team at many stretches during the final, few series of this playoff run. Of course, it was Laurent Brossoit against the Winnipeg Jets, and he was the goalie the first few games in that Edmonton series, but then he gets injured, and then Adin Hill comes in and really never looks back, does not relinquish his position as the starting goaltender of the Vegas Golden Knights, and really didn't have too many shaky performances throughout the duration of his time in net for this team. Jonathan Marchessault, of course, wins the Conn Smythe Trophy, but I really do think there could have been a case to be made for Adin Hill as well. Maybe if he gets to play the entirety of the playoffs, it's a different conversation. But even with Marchessault winning, should not negate what Adin Hill did, coming really out of nowhere for a team that had so many other options at goalie, but those guys get injured, whether it's Robin Lehner on pretty much IR the entire season, Logan Thompson goes down, Laurent Brossoit goes down, and many people said, why Brossoit goes down, why aren't you playing Jonathan Quick, the guy who's won the Stanley Cup before, who's won a Conn Smythe Trophy before, but you go with the guy in Adin Hill who didn't have a ton of NHL experience, and he stepped up when he was needed. And I think there's, maybe some things just in terms of goaltending that maybe Jake Ottinger looked at and noticed, and maybe he'll grow in some ways. But as good as Adin Hill was, not to, again, negate anything that he did because he was phenomenal, I think a ton of the credit has to go to that defensive core that surrounded him night in and night out. Guys like Shea Theodore, Alec Martinez, Alex Pietrangelo, Nick Hague, Braden McNabb, Zach Whitecloud. I mean, those guys were just studs all postseason long, doing the dirty work and not always getting the attention or getting the spotlight, but doing what was necessary in order to make sure themselves and the team was set up for success. They were, blocking shots, getting in passing lanes. Those guys, all those guys that I just named, combined for 13 blocked shots in Game 5, putting their body on the line for the sake of the team. And they did this a ton against the Dallas Stars as well. There's a reason that the Dallas Stars got shut out twice in the Western Conference Final. And part of it had to do with Adin Hill, but part of it also had to do with the fact that defense made it incredibly difficult to get in tight around Adin Hill. And that's really how you have to beat him. A lot of the goals that the Stars did score were mad scrambles in front of the net, especially, later in that series, Jason Robertson getting a few down in close by the crease. It's going to happen every now and then, but it wasn't a cakewalk to get down low in the slot right around the crease and get those goals like the Stars have been accustomed to doing, either on the power play or at 5-on-5. They kept that slot area on lockdown and did a pretty decent job of limiting rush opportunities in the latter stages of the postseason, which the Stars do like to get out and run when they have the proper personnel out there on the ice. If that top line's out there and you can get Rope Hintz and Joe Pavelski, Jason Robertson on a breakaway, you're in for trouble. Tyler Seguin, even though he can't move like he once could, he's pretty dangerous on a breakaway as well. Wyatt Johnston, Jamie Benn, and even guys like Ty Dellandrea, Radek Faksa. If there was a gritty defensive play made on one end and it led to a breakaway, the Stars had some pretty good breakaway options, but the VGK did a pretty good job for the most part at limiting those looks because of that elite defense that they had. And I say elite defense, none of these guys that I named are necessarily considered the best in the league in terms of defense, but it's that group aspect of it. It's the strength in numbers aspect of it that I truly admire from them during these past few months here in the playoffs. And I think the Stars need to take a good long look at the way that the VGK played defense and take note of it and do everything that they can this offseason to build a strong defensive core to complement that offense that they have. Because offense, as valuable as it is here in the NHL, it isn't everything. The VGK offense was fine in the regular season. They were 14th in the league in goals scored. And the Stars were 7th. The Stars had one of the best offenses in the NHL. The VGK, not so much, but they were able to do enough on offense while maintaining a very strong and sound defensive structure. And that's why they were able to find so much success. And I think the Dallas Stars and the front office, the coaching staff need to take the proper steps in order to make sure that the Stars can replicate that to the best of their abilities, adding players that need to be added to the roster, pulling players that need to be pulled from the roster, potentially buying out a few players that maybe don't need to be on the team anymore. It's easier said than done, especially with the Stars cap situation, but it certainly is possible. And of course, you have to factor in health as well. A few Stars defensemen maybe not playing fully 100% healthy. We know Yanni Hakanpää fell into that boat. And, that's something that has to be factored in the latter stages of the postseason. But at the end of the day, you need defense to win championships. You need the defense to help out good goaltending, because we know Jake Ottinger is also a good goaltender who was battling injuries throughout the playoff run. So he wasn't at his best. And unfortunately, the defense around him at way too many times was also not at their best. And so that's, of course, a recipe for disaster for the Dallas Stars, and hopefully something that they can improve upon and fix here over the next month or so here in the offseason to get the team and personnel truly at its best. So that way they can put together that full cohesive team and be a dominating force in the postseason, like we saw the Vegas Golden Knights be here over, the past few months, as they just wiped the floor with a lot of different teams, including the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup Final. So, I mean, again, as good as Adin Hill was, I think that he's played himself into a fresh new contract, whether that's with Vegas or a different team is to be determined. That defense surrounding him deserves all the credit in the world for making life incredibly difficult for opposing offenses. Edmonton, also one of the best offenses in the league all season, and they shut them down at multiple points throughout the playoffs in that second round series. They shut down the Stars multiple times, and they also shut down the Panthers when they needed to. So hopefully the Dallas Stars can learn from that and look to replicate it to some extent. They obviously won't be able to do it the exact same way, but find the right personnel, find the right guys that are willing to get their hands dirty, willing to put in the work, even if they don't necessarily always end up getting the spotlight. And if they're able to find that, I don't think the personal spotlight will matter too much, because they'll be getting that group recognition and hopefully hoisting the Stanley Cup when the season is over. We got one more segment left on today's episode, talking about patience and why, even when things seem to be done the right way, you don't always get the result you want, but that doesn't mean it won't pay dividends down the road. We'll talk about that and how the Stars can learn from the Knights and the Panthers coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is also brought to you by our friends at Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg to give you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. They fit better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs have fixed the issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. If you want to get your own pair, just go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. Third and final segment of today's episode of Locked On Stars, talking about the lessons that the Stars can learn from the two Stanley Cup Final participants, the Vegas Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers. We've mainly focused on the VGK here, but I think even with the Panthers' shortcomings in this series and, whether or not the Stars could have beaten them if they made it to the Cup Final, I think that there is one final thing that the Stars can learn from both of these teams. I think both teams taught us that things don't always go to plan, even when you've done a lot of good and you've taken the right steps to put yourself in a successful situation. The Florida Panthers were President's Cup trophy winners in 2022 and lost in the second round of the playoffs. And everyone thought, they're going to be back and better this next year. They trade some pieces, but they get Matthew Tkachuk. They're going to be fine. And, they kept the core intact for the most part, but things did not really go swimmingly for the Panthers throughout the majority of the season. In fact, up until the final few weeks of the regular season, it seemed like they were going to miss out on the playoffs altogether. It took, of course, them winning some games, but a few, fortunate, outcomes in some other games for them to even make it into the postseason. And then their reward was getting matched up with the best regular season team that we've ever seen in NHL history in the Boston Bruins. And they take them down. And then they really go on one of the more incredible runs through the Eastern Conference that we've seen in quite some time. Just the way that they dominated the second and third round was truly spectacular. I think there's a lot to be, said about the perseverance and the heart of that group, buying into Paul Maurice's system, even when things weren't going great. And when the fan base was having their doubts, when the national media was having their doubts, saying that Florida, even though they kept the core intact, just isn't the same team, and they wouldn't be able to capture that magic that they had captured last season. In Vegas, kind of the opposite. They missed the postseason last year altogether. Injuries riddled that team. They just couldn't put a few wins together down the stretch to get into the dance. The Dallas Stars end up getting in over them, as well as the Nashville Predators. But then they turn it around. They get a new coach and they win the whole thing a year later. They get healthy. They make the right moves at the trade deadline, and they find themselves successful and they find themselves champions at the end of the next season. And I think the Stars can learn from both of those situations in different ways. Obviously, their situation not really the same as either of those teams, but I mean, I think the Stars did a lot of the right things over the past year. They signed guys to extensions. They made the right moves at the trade deadline. They made some pretty good acquisitions in the offseason. As I talked about yesterday, not the best debut for Mason Marchment, but I still think the best is yet to come from him. I think there's potential with a guy like Niels Lundqvist on the roster. I think they've done a lot of the right things, yet they weren't rewarded for it. But I don't think that this run at the Stanley Cup was the end-all, be-all for the Dallas Stars. As I've said multiple times this season, and I still do believe that this is the beginning of a Stanley Cup champion winning window for this organization, given the young talent that they have, and also given some of the veteran players that are kind of the heart and soul of the team continuing to play with this club, the Pavelskis, Benns, and Sagans of the world. So I think that there's something to be said of getting so close to your goal, getting so close to the Stanley Cup finals, but eventually falling short, but then, of course, finding a way to get back the next season. It's, again, easier said than done, but I think that this group is capable of making it happen, and I can't wait to see the way that they battle to get themselves back into a championship-winning position. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you so much again for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcasting platform. We are always free and available, no matter where or how you choose to listen. You can find and follow us on social media at Locked On Stars on Twitter and Instagram. At Dane_Lewis is my personal Twitter account. And I hope you guys enjoy your Thursday, and we'll see you back here tomorrow for the final episode of the week.